Hello, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Networker Live. I'm Chris Lyford. I'm the senior editor here at Psychotherapy Networker. It is my great pleasure to be joined today by Mark Greene. Mark is a senior editor at the Good Men Project. He's the founder of Remaking Manhood, and he's the author of several books, including the Relational Book for Parenting, Remaking Manhood, and the Little Me Too book for men. I recently wrote an article for our latest issue. This is the March issue. It's called Where Are All Our Friends? Therapists Confront the Loneliness Epidemic. Pick up a copy if you haven't already. You can subscribe on our website. You'll also notice there's a link at the bottom of your screen, as well as a QR code if you are interested in subscribing. We have a great deal right now. The article I wrote is called In Search of the Great Male Friend. This was a personal piece for me. I shared a little bit about my own experience with friendships, my struggles with friendships. I talked a little bit about good friends I've had for a long time. I talked about friends who disappointed me, my struggle to make and maintain friendships in, we'll call it early-ish adulthood. If you get a chance to read it, I would love to hear your feedback. I interviewed Mark for the piece. We had a great conversation that just went on and on. Mark, I would like to start with having you tell our viewers a little bit about who you are, what you do. What's a day in the life of Mark Greene?
Well, Chris, I thank you so much for this article you've written, because I think it speaks to the absolute fundamental core issue that's confronting us, not only as men, but as women and non-binary people, because we're facing epidemic levels of social isolation. And my work as a consultant and a coach and an author and a senior editor at the Good Men Project has been to look at all of the research that has been going on for decades now about social connection for boys and men, and about the culture of masculinity that sort of forms our beliefs about what it means to be a man, and how that particular culture of masculinity, which a lot of folks are referring to as Manbox culture, reinforces a patriarchal structure of privilege and systems and structures that privilege men over women, but also costs us our human connection in the world. So that's the basis of my work, and all of my books speak to that. And I'm happy to get into a little bit of the research and the background on the Manbox culture just as a baseline for us.
Great. And I'd like to clarify for all our viewers out there, I know not all of you are men, and there are many therapists who are women. So this is obviously an issue that affects women as well, that affects female therapists who are working with men. Maybe you're working with men who seem to be struggling with friendship. So I want to just indicate this is a piece, this is a topic for you as well.
Yes.
But
absolutely.
maybe we can start with the big question. This term has been thrown around a lot lately. The friendship recession, the male friendship recession in particular. Do you believe, Mark, that we are in the middle of a male friendship recession?
Absolutely. And all the data points in that direction. But it shouldn't come as a surprise to us when we look at how dominance-based masculine culture begins to impact boys in childhood coming forward, in terms of enforcing a set of rules that are supposedly the rules for being a man. And I'm just going to name those rules real quickly and then move into research by Niobe Way, who directly addresses the crisis of connection in her research about boys from early to late adolescence. So the rules of the man box, originally cited by a guy named Paul Kibble in the early 1980s, in what he called the Act Like a Man box, include things like don't show your emotions except for anger, be a breadwinner, never a caregiver, be tough, never ask for help, have lots of sex, talk to men about cars or sports, but don't talk about anything deep, be heterosexual, never homosexual, and have control over women and girls. These are the rules of man box culture. And by the way, I'll sometimes name these rules out for a room full, and a man in the back will raise his hand and say, "Oh yeah, that thing about controlling women and girls, that's not really a thing anymore." And what I respond with is that there's a beautiful body of research by an organization called Equimundo, and their research document is called The Man Box, and you can download the PDF. Just go out and Google it; you'll find it right away. And one of the questions they pose in that research is a yes or no question. And they asked men in Mexico, in Great Britain, and the United States this question: if a guy has a girlfriend or a wife, he deserves to know where she is all the time. Yes or no? And I'll say it again. If a guy has a girlfriend or wife, he deserves to know where she is at all times. I tell the men in the room, look, that I know men think they're protectors and think they have some role to look after women, but this isn't about protection. This is about control. And the percentage of men in the United States of America who answered yes to that question, 46%. This was in 2017. So the idea that we are supposed to have control over women and girls hasn't gone away. Let me jump really quick to Niobe Way's research.
Please.
She's been doing research for 3 decades at New York University. She's a psychologist there. And her book, Deep Secrets, outlines all this research. But what she basically discovered was that when she asked a very simple question of boys in early adolescence, what does your best friend mean to you? They would respond, they love their best friend. They'd use the word love. They say, I love my best friend. And they'd say, without my best friend, I'll go crazy. And the reason they're saying that is because boys in early adolescence are having deeply meaningful conversations with each other about how to process what's going on in their lives. But by late adolescence, Way's research reveals that those boys are no longer concerned about what's going on for them authentically. After this drumbeat of Manbox culture and the rules about how to be a real man have hit them over and over again, not monthly or weekly or even daily, boys are policing each other about these rules hourly. They then disengage from those close friendships because they want to prove something entirely different, that they're not little kids, girly, or gay. And they disengage from those close friendships in late adolescence, and their suicide numbers become 4 times that of girls. So we're talking about a culture of masculinity which systemically breaks boys' emotional expression and relational connection in the world and blocks them beginning much earlier than early adolescence, actually. Judy Chu has research going back to kids who are 4 years old, beginning to hide their emotional acuity, already taking on this stoic performance of masculinity. But the long and short of it is they never get the chance to do the trial and error work to grow their nuanced emotional expression or relational capacities. And then they get slotted into a hierarchical dominance-based masculine culture, which basically says, we don't want to hear who you are authentically. We don't want to hear what's going on for you. You have one way to validate your masculinity, and that is to dominate the men around you and the women in your life. And that's what gets us this culture of disconnection for men. The social isolation cited by Cigna is over 50% of people in the US are sometimes they're always alone. That's what they feel. And when you have that level of social isolation, you're talking about a health impact equal to smoking a pack of cigarettes a day. So we have higher levels of cancer, of heart disease, of neurodegenerative diseases. I mean, literally, men are trained out of close connection. They're locked away in this hyper-competitive masculinity, and they're dying earlier because of it.
A little context, Niobe Way, who's just a brilliant human being, actually introduced Mark and me a few months back. We actually did an interview with Niobe. That's, for those of you who are interested in this interview, Niobe Way. Look it up on our website, psychotherapynetworker.org. We did a great interview with Niobe a few months back about this subject, about her work with adolescents, and that switch that seems to flip in early to late adolescence, where boys begin to buy into this idea of the man box and man box culture. For those of you just joining us, I am here with Mark Greene. He's senior editor at the Good Men Project. He's the founder of Remaking Manhood, as well as the author of several books, including the Relational Book for Parenting and Remaking Manhood. Mark, I'm just curious, what sort of things are you hearing from the men you're working with? We talked a little bit about adolescence and how we got here, but what sorts of things are you hearing from men who find themselves sort of in this pit they can't quite get out of, this hyper-masculine pit?
Well, we have different communities of men who are speaking in different ways. I spend a lot of time on the internet. If you're on any kind of social media platform, you can find me at Remaking Manhood. And there are places where I'm engaging incels and MRAs and masculinity extremists, white supremacists, that population of radicalized men. And they are doing what the man box taught them to do, which is to ignore their own internal process of self-reflection and to blame external groups for what's going on in their lives. So their reactivity around economic and social and disconnection and all of that stuff, their anti-woke position is that they blame feminists, they blame immigrants, they blame everyone but themselves for anything that's not working right for them. And what we have to understand is that is a classic example of a dominance hierarchy, which teaches men, you tried to get an outcome you wanted, someone gave you pushback, double down on dominance. So that population I consider to be somewhat difficult to shift off their position because they bought into this thing 100%. But there's another population of men who are beginning to lean into this idea that they want more out of relationships, and sometimes they'll go into men's work groups like the Mankind Project. Sometimes they'll or Every Man. Sometimes they'll get with a therapist or a group of men in their church or whatever it is. But they're beginning to say things to me like, um, I'm asking for more from my friendships. And you described it so beautifully in your article. This is not an easy thing to find still. And I struggle right now today with finding enough close male friendships because it's the double whammy of conditioning people not to share what's really going on for them. But men are very, very tied up in schedules and busy. And sometimes that double whammy of disconnection and hiding our authentic selves makes that difficult. But I do find connection in men's work and men's groups. I'm part of a group that's run by a therapist here in New York, and we get together and we talk about what's going on for us. And in those populations of men, it's easier to find the kind of guy that you're describing in your article that you're looking for.
Mhm. Great. I'm curious, how do you begin to find a foothold with men who put up a wall, who might be hyper defensive, not just men from the men's rights activism community or the red pill community, whatever you want to call it, but men who are just very guarded and afraid to talk about their friendships, but maybe you have a sense that they're hurting or
Yeah.
that there's this aspect of life that's missing. Where do you begin? What sort of questions do you ask?
Well, there's a man named Ray Arata who has been in men's work for a long time and runs a thing called the Better Man Conference. And Ray says, when he's in front of a room of men, when he's with a man talking, he says, I go first. I say, hey, this is what's going on for me. Sometimes we call it a check-in, but you can do it in an organized way, or you can do it in an impromptu way. But you begin by saying, man, I, I'm having a good day and a lot of good things happen, but there's some stuff that's really weighing on me. And you might share a little bit about that. And because honestly and truly, we as men are tracking the men in our circles who are going to shame us for that kind of behavior. But Niobe Way and others have said many, many times in their stories that once you grant permission to the room, men start talking. And we see this in Ashanti Branch's work, the Million Mask Movement. He gets together with boys in high school groups, and he has a process with a piece of paper with a mask on the front and back. And he says, write on the front what you show people, write on the back what you hide. These boys are writing tough, funny, smart on the front. They're writing sad, lonely, thinking about suicide on the back. And in those circles, they start talking. So I think that what we're really looking for is opportunities to grant permission to the men we're with to say what's going on for them.
Mark, in our discussion a few months back for the article, you mentioned that there's a, quote, massive movable middle of men who want that permission to be vulnerable again, to have loving, soft friendships. So it sounds like you're hopeful that we can get there as a culture.
Absolutely. And I also think that the man box culture is fragmenting along with patriarchy. There are so many voices in the world now that are speaking up. 50 years ago, patriarchy was locked in because all the other populations didn't have enough organized resistance. They just essentially had to take it. And I'm talking about people of color. I'm talking about LGBTQ communities, I'm talking about women. I'm talking about anybody who's not a white male, essentially. So we were able to sort of control the circumstances to such a degree that the amount of doubling down and dominance we had to assert was relatively manageable. But now that women and all these other populations are standing up against these dominance-based patriarchal norms, men find themselves doubling down over and over and over again, which breaks relationships and breaks our workplace standing and breaks a lot of stuff really quickly. So some men at that point split out, right? They say, I'm going to keep doubling down, and they may end up unemployed and older, and they may be Trump voters, and they may be just angry all the time. But some men say, you know what? This isn't working. This is
Mm.
not working. So those men lean into a different kind of conversation. They lean, and and the great news is they're leading the way for a lot of younger men. And if I may just reference Cole, who's helping us with this broadcast, he said himself in a pre-conversation, he's looking for more. And I think those men are granting privilege, granting permission, sorry, for younger men to say, I want more.
Mm. Mm. Now, it sounds like so many men, and I write about this in the piece, are sort of trapped in what has been referred to as the shoulder to shoulder friendship. And I talk
Mhm.
about this idea of men's spaces. Maybe we could talk about that for a bit. Men's spaces being places where men can meet and bond, but in sort of a shoulder to shoulder fashion rather than a face to face fashion, which is typically attributed to women and female friendships. Can we talk about that idea of men's spaces and the shoulder to shoulder friendship?
Sure. Well, it's not lost on me that white supremacists are uh, showing up as communities where men work out, develop their bodies, right? There's a lot of that masculine, dominant energy that they're using. So, any context, shoulder to shoulder, men's spaces, anything that we name, in fact, in this conversation, to the far extreme end of militancy over to this more humanizing, connecting masculinity. And that humanizing masculinity shows up in men's shoulder to shoulder spaces, as you say, which invite men to sort of turn and face each other eventually. But uh, we've always been taught as men that we're allowed to be excited about sports, about competition, about this expression of masculine power and strength. But the other aspects of being human, very powerful human capacities, not gendered in any way, things like empathy, caregiving, holding uncertainty, listening. When boys are told early in their lives, don't show your emotions, the way that they are policed is, what are you, a sissy? What are you, a girl? What are you, gay? Those are the kinds of ways that we denigrate the feminine in order to train these boys out of things like empathy, emotional expression, caregiving. And so those capacities are hidden. A lot of boys and men hide authentic aspects of themselves in order to fit in, but they're still there. They still exist. And I will say that now the man box culture, the collapsing of patriarchy, the collapse of man box culture means that the barrier that they feel like is there to being more authentic is becoming paper thin. They can just poke it with their finger and it breaks through. And so I think we're at a tipping point for men where if I start an emotional conversation, I see men in the room nodding. Yeah, they're like, yep, I could go there. I could do that. It's a very hopeful time, Chris. Very hopeful.
Yeah, yeah. I'm curious, Mark. We talked a little bit about men helping other men more generally, sort of out of these places and giving them permission to be vulnerable and soft and loving. For those watching, namely therapists, where does the work happen, do you find? Does it happen in therapy offices? Does it happen in groups? We've heard a lot about men's groups, and for me
Mhm.
personally, it sounds a little antiquated, sort of this thing from the 60s, 70s, 80s. Are
Mm.
groups still alive and well? Do you find that's where change happens? Um, yeah, let's talk about that.
Well, my partner who co-authored the relational book for parenting with me, her name is Dr. Saliha Bava. She's a couple and family therapist in New York, and she teaches that at the graduate level at Mercy University here. We have done presentations for therapists. We did one for Harvard University's extended education. And we do them periodically. So come look me up at remakingmanhood.com if you want to find out when we're doing it again. But we work with therapists to help them understand man box culture and how it shows up in therapy, how it's shown up in for Saliha and her clients and whatnot. But we also try to make it clear that, like patriarchy, man box culture has been internalized by a lot of other people besides men, by non-binary folks and by women. And since the majority of therapists continue to be women, women can often find themselves having to self-reflect about how the man box culture expectations of their male clients are showing up for them sometimes a little bit, like,
Mhm.
he's not talking about his emotions, but of course he isn't. Or um, you know, this guy is going to be shutting his wife down. He's gonna talk over her. I expect that to happen. And so in the moment that we hold these ideas about the limitations of men or the roles men are supposed to play, sometimes that can be a challenge for therapists as much as the actual behavior of men. But the degree to which these ideas that he's supposed to be the breadwinner, that all of these antiquated gendered ideas, gender role ideas that the man box drives, are a huge conundrum for therapists to try to untangle in the therapy process. But when we understand the rules of the man box and how that's driving some of these beliefs, there are therapists who, when it is appropriate, they share this book, the Little Me Too book for men, because it goes through all the rules of the man box. It goes through the cultural stuff. It goes through how it shows up at work. 75 pages. It's a quick read. They share that and make it part of the process, or part of the conversation. It's not always appropriate, but sometimes it is.
Yeah. Yeah. Mark, I'd like to turn, I know we have a few minutes left. I'd like to turn briefly to the piece I wrote, In Search of the Great Male Friend. This is no secret. I talk about this in the piece. I encourage all of you out there watching to check it out. This one really meant a lot to me. I poured a lot of myself into it. But I talk about my own experience with friendships, in particular, 3 really good friends I've had. One has fallen away. Another one recently passed away. And I am currently left with what I would call one great male friend. And I find myself in sort of a bind here where I'm trying to learn how to make friends again at in my mid-30s. So I think there are a lot of men who also feel like they could use more friends or better friends. Maybe they want to sort of reconnect with friends who have fallen away. What is your advice to men like me who are struggling with this? Where do we begin?
I think that one of the powerful influences of this can be our partners. Just like in the therapy room, sometimes our partners can internalize, whether we're gay or straight or whatever it is, our partners can internalize ideas from the man box and maybe not understand how precious and valuable it is for our partners to have friendships outside that primary relationship. So when you have a conscious discussion like you talked about having with your partner in the article, right? Saying, I'm struggling with this. That partner can grant you permission to do the work you need to do to find those relationships. And that means sometimes stepping out of the house, going and doing whatever you need to do. But if there are women out there listening to this conversation, you can grant your partner the right to be more emotionally expressive, to share his doubts and fears, and to seek out relationships with men that are meant to be as emotionally important as that relationship with you. And there's a fascinating piece of research in Naomi Wei's book, Deep Secrets. It's on page 9. It was a study done in Europe around people who were in primary relationships but didn't have a circle of friends outside that. And it literally says that much higher rates of heart disease. Doesn't matter if you have a primary partner. You need a circle of other friends as well. So if it's having that impact on our bodies, imagine the impact it's having on us emotionally as men if we can only look to our partner. And this is why women often complain, I'm carrying all the emotional load for this human being, right? So there's a multitude of reasons why men should go seek these connections. As for men listening right now, I'm telling you that when you take a risk with 5 men to talk a little bit about what's going on for you, hey, I need some support. When you make an ask of another man, maybe 1 or 2 of them will say, oh, bro, I'm not comfortable with that. But men are ready to help each other and they want to hear that request. And once that conversation begins, something shifts, it changes. And you never can go back to that shoulder to shoulder, surface level, friend or proximity thing. But we've got to have the courage as men to start saying, this is what's going on for me. And I would like your help. I would like to talk to you about it. I'd like to let you know what's going on for me.
Beautiful, beautiful, Mark. Any parting thoughts for the therapists watching out there? Any words of wisdom you want to give? Anything we haven't covered already that you really like to leave us with?
Well, let me just say to begin with that because I'm married to a therapist, I often end up at parties full of therapists, and I love therapists. I just think they're doing such crucial, important human work. The only thing that I can suggest to you is that if I believe that if you sort of lean into this question of how is the culture of masculinity, the systems and structures informing this man in my therapy office's view of himself, if you begin to unpack that from these rules and ideas that have come down for generations, what you're going to find is deep shame and a lot of hiding. And if they can see that it's not them, it's this structure, man. This structure has taught you a lot of things that you can unteach yourself. That might be a little bit of help in the context of that work.
Wonderful. Mark, thank you so much for joining us. It's always a pleasure.
Mm.
You've helped me so much personally, and you've really contributed a lot to this piece as well. Again, the piece is called "In Search of the Great Male Friend." You'll find it in our March issue. Those of you watching, we also have our annual symposium is coming up next week. 4 days, we call it the Mardi Gras of Psychotherapy. You'll see a link at the bottom of the screen there. Highly encourage you to check that out as well. Mark, thank you again. I hope we stay in touch, and just thank you.
Thank you, Chris, and I hope you will consider me a friend.
Sure, we do.
All right.
All right. Take care, everyone.